about fears. Let's talk about love. Yeah, I got fears, but I ain't got no love.
Today I want to talk about a documentary that I just watched last night on Netflix in regards to John Wayne Gacy. So, where do I start with this? Number one, it's been out for a while. I have shunned away from true crime documentaries, and it's really weird. I don't understand that. That's all I used to watch up until about, let's say 10 years ago. And then maybe it's because all day long that's what I do, so then I don't want to watch it. But I'm always glad when I do, almost always. The one exception being the show, It Was Him or whatever that was about Eddie Edwards. That was a waste of an entire night watching that. But besides that, they've all been pretty decent, and I expected this one to be good because of Joe Berlinger. I've dealt with Joe in the past, talked to him in regards to a TV show that was on Showtime. The Wrong Man, I think it was, but I digress. This show was about John Wayne Gacy. I've known about John Wayne Gacy, just like I'm sure anybody that's watching this channel probably has as well. But the reason I watched it, I'll sit there at night and I'll flip through, sometimes a lot of things before I choose something. But earlier in the day, I was researching a unsolved homicide from 1978 in Los Angeles, California. And I was flipping through old newspapers, flipping electronically, and I came across, bodies found in crawl space up to number 16 or something like that. It was about John Wayne Gacy. Two things struck me. One, I was like, wow, that happened in 1978. For some reason, I thought it was like in the early 90s. And secondly, I was like, this is making major headlines here in Los Angeles. And that happened in Chicago. So those two things, I was like, wow, that's well, like puts a light on me there. It was just, put that down a little, blinded me. So that was earlier in the day. Then I was going through Netflix. I actually was looking for, and I'm almost ashamed to admit this, but not so much, Cobra Kai, just because I like the backstory of Johnny Lawrence and Ralph Macchio. But I digress. Again, I run it into this show about John Wayne Gacy. Now, Joe Berlinger, I think, had done one just like that about these lost tapes being found for Ted Bundy, but I'm not 100% sure it was Joe Berlinger. But great concept, good show. And it was 3 episodes, and that seems to be the norm anymore as well. The television show that I'm currently doing, which I found out is now, I think, going to be on Oxygen, but then streaming on NBC, is 3 episodes as well. And originally it was supposed to be like 6. I'm like, how are we going to condense all this into 3 episodes? But that's where we're at, and it just seems like a lot of the true crime stuff is 3 episodes anymore. So I watched all 3 last night, and I always want to learn whenever I watch something like that anymore. It didn't used to be like that. I'd watch and for entertainment. But now I try to pick up things. What did anybody miss in the childhood growing up? How did law enforcement piece it together? That really intrigues me. I want to know how he was caught. Was it luck? which a lot of times it is? Was it a smart detective who said, oh, wait, this, which a lot of times it is? Or did the person just like turn himself in, which isn't as, doesn't happen as often, but it does happen. Think of, I was going to say Joel Rifkin, but not Joel Rifkin. He was caught with a body in his car being pulled over. But a good show nonetheless, and I learned some things. And this is what I've learned. Number one, the childhood that John Wayne Gacy had, where he was abused. It doesn't seem sexually abused, but at least verbally and probably physically by his father, who was an alcoholic. To me, it seems that era, meaning the 50s, late 40s, had a lot of alcohol issues with fathers. I can see why. I mean, listen, that generation worked harder than any generation after it, for sure. Times were tough, and sometimes when times are tough, people unfortunately succumb to the bottle. I understand it. I don't get it. I don't subscribe to it, but I understand it. But in addition to that, he was caught, and this is in his own words, putting on his mother's underwear. And then she caught him and punished him for it. I've seen that a handful of times in some violent sexual predators that I have studied. I don't think that has changed. That, used to have the McDonald triad, right? It was bedwetting, fire starting, and cruelty to animals. That has somewhat changed since the study first came out, and I believe that was probably started by the FBI's behavioral squad. I don't think that's the case so much anymore. And the reason that is, and I'll go into that more when I think I might have a whole chapter dedicated to that in my new book, Mastering Cold Case Investigations, this hardcover. I did a whole chapter on myths, and one of them was this triage of fire starting, bedwetting, and cruelty to animals. I just don't think that you can depend on that anymore. I think it was pretty good back in the day, but society has changed, and a kid's not sitting at home watching 3 channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, with his family with one television, and most of the time, they are out wandering around looking for things that it just doesn't happen anymore. Everybody has a cell phone. They have content like that. So as society changes, so too, I think human nature changes. And so this putting of underwear, I've seen that constantly through the years, I should say decades, where I didn't see the fire starting, bedwetting, cruelty to animals anymore. So that stood out to me. That's a precursor. Now, not always. It could be just somebody experimenting. A kid experimenting, not understanding things, but it's something that if a parent or somebody sees, they have to take notice. So I learned from that. That was interesting, his upbringing, and of course it didn't get into all of it. But one of the things that it did get into was him being sent to prison basically for 10 years. And it said for sodomy. And that right there, that line on a police report from this documentary is what ended up getting him arrested. And I'll get into that a little later. But what I want to take from this is he is arrested for picking up he was a member of the JCs, which is like I don't know what you call it, Habitat for Humanity type of deal. People doing community service, but they want to get into politics. And John Wayne Gacy wanted to be known. He was a narcissist. I've never seen a more arrogant serial offender in my lifetime. But he had given a ride to one of his fellow JC members' kids, who was like 16. He was hitchhiking. And then it ended up performing oral sex both ways. They didn't say anything about sodomy. Sodomy was the charge that he got charged with. He ended up getting sentenced to 10 years. And he said in this he couldn't believe that, 10 years. He only did 18 months. He was the head chef there. He got out. And then he ended up, his next charge on his rap sheet says battery. And that's all it says. But if you were to dive into it, you would see that he raped another male, drugged him with chloroform, and raped him. So that gets to my second point, and it's a very important bulletin point here, is that these people, and when I say these people, if you want to take it as derogatory, seems like everything gets taken as offensive, I encourage you to do so, because I will say it again. These people, meaning deviant sexual offenders, cannot, and I repeat this, cannot be rehabilitated. I've not seen one case. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I stay in my lane. I don't go outside my lane and say that I am. But I will say, from experience as a detective in investigating serial sexual offenders, I have not seen any that have been rehabilitated. But on the flip side of that, what I have seen is disturbing. That these people are let out of prison, such as John Wayne Gacy after 10 years, and they escalate, meaning now it's not just good enough to sexually assault. Now they will kill. Now, there's two reasons for this, and only two. One is because the sexual assault just doesn't do it for them anymore. So they progress to murder. And number two, if it isn't that, it's because they are not going back to jail and they are not leaving a witness this time. So what did that 18 months of John Wayne Gacy being locked up really accomplish? To me, it took him off the street and made some people safe for 18 months. That's what it did. But on the other side of that, it taught him to not leave any witnesses, especially to a narcissist whose entire being is being the life of the party, being powerful, having all eyes on you. He enjoyed that. What takes all the spotlight off of him is him being outed as a homosexual. Now he goes and describes it as, I am not a homosexual. He's bisexual. And by bisexual, he means I just have sex with somebody. It's just like masturbation. I have no feelings towards them. And then he went on to describe paying for sex with these males that ended up in the crawl space of his basement as a item that you buy at a store. And if you take that item home after you bought it and you break it, you're allowed to because you paid for it. And that is his mentality about human life and what he did. So, the question comes up in my mind. Okay, Kenny, you're saying that a person like John Wayne Gacy cannot be rehabilitated. So, his first offense that I know of was this charge of sodomy, picking up a 16-year-old boy. It seems to me that it was consensual. At least the documentary didn't say that it was forced. Now, the boy ended up telling his dad. His dad ends up going to the police department, and that's how John Wayne Gacy was arrested to begin with. Now, he was a minor, though, and that's a big deal, okay? Whether it was forced, consensual or not, he can't give consent. He's a minor. He's 16. So, he was sentenced to the 10 years. Would I say, okay, he should be given a second chance? That's tough because even though he was a minor, it wasn't a 5-year-old. It was a 16-year-old teenager. I think that I would have, if I was the judge, 10 years I think would have been good with the possibility of parole. So I can't fault them. At that point in time, when he was, I don't know what he was, 20, he was in his 20s, for that with the 16-year-old boy, it wasn't a violent sexual act. It was a consensual act. And I understand the asterisk with it being a minor, a 16-year-old. But I don't think you lock that person up for the rest of their life for that. But then we fast forward to his next charge, and he's murdering. Okay, after he gets out, he moves to Chicago. 1971, I believe, was his first murder. He went down, premeditated, went to the Greyhound bus station where he knew young boys were, and he picked one up, brought him home, and sexually molested and murdered him. I think he said on that one he stabbed him. He made up some bullshit story that the guy came at him with a knife, the kid. The only thing that you can believe that John Wayne Gacy says is that he murdered these boys. How he did it, for the most part, I don't believe. Now, I say that because I see what they took in the search warrant. Chains, handcuffs, 18-inch dildos, boards where you would be handcuffed to, the torture devices and restraints. John Wayne Gacy got off on control. And that is another component of a lot, if not all of these serial killers, is control. But I want to get back to his second charge. After he is let out, years go by, he's married, but he gets charged for raping another adult. And this is forcefully. He takes chloroform, and the guy's face was all burned, took him home, put him in that device where he's strapped in, and uses that 18-inch dildo on this guy. He goes to the police station. He doesn't kill this guy miraculously. I don't know why. Okay, he's saved by the grace of God. For some reason, John Wayne Gacy drugs him, drops him off somewhere. Guy wakes up. He's like, "Where am I? What happened to me? Why am I hurt? Why can't I walk right?" Thank God I'm alive, though. So he goes to the police station, makes a report. They don't take him serious. Why? He's a homosexual. Okay? And it was 1978. This guy, who I would love to meet and shake his hand, because he says, you know what? I'll find out who it is myself. So when he was drugged and kidnapped, when he was waking up, he saw an exit sign in John Wayne Gacy's car when Gacy's taking him to his house to rape him. He sees an exit sign. So he knows that, hey, we got off that exit. So he went and rented a car and he staked out that exit until he saw John Wayne Gacy's car, wrote down the plate number and gave it to police and said, hey, I'm doing your job for you. This is the guy that assaulted me. So they did make an arrest. Gacy is on bail or probation because of this. Now, at this juncture, had John Wayne Gacy not been caught for these murders, if he is on bail for these charges, this is when a flag should come up in people's head, a red flag, and say, okay, he can't be let out anymore. You chloroform a guy and you violently rape him. Now, if you look back and now you see, oh, he did 18 months for a sodomy charge back in. Oh, there's 2 strikes. We're not giving him a third. He's a lifer. He's in jail. I'm not letting him out. Why? Because he cannot be rehabilitated. So, let's get to the murder. Again, why he's out, and I can't remember if it was on bail or if he was on probation. I hope it wasn't probation. I hope maybe it was bail. And the difference being, probation means, okay, you've already went to a preliminary hearing. You went probably to a trial and was sentenced to probation for this rape that you did when you chloroformed this guy. I seriously hope that wasn't the case. I hope it was, okay, you've been arrested. You have a court hearing coming up. And if the judge decided to let him out on ROR or whatever the amount is, I'm not really okay with ROR, but okay, I can deal with that better than probation. He has murdered already multiple times. So what gets John Wayne Gacy on police's radar? He's at a pharmacy and he is getting a bid or something for some construction work. He locks in on this guy. His last name, I believe, was Peast. I think his name was Rob Peast. 15-year-old, good-looking kid that worked there. He looked like Gacy's type. And by Gacy's type, he tells us his type in this documentary. You know, it was good-looking, athletic, kind of innocent-looking kids. Now, I don't know how Rob Peast ended up getting in John Wayne Gacy's car. Now, John will tell the story that Rob approached him and was asking for a job. John said, I don't have time for all this. I got to go. He was always on the run. But Rob said, well, I'll get in with you and we can talk about it. That just doesn't seem right to me because how's he getting back there? But I've seen no indications that John Wayne Gacy ever forcefully and violently abducted anybody. Maybe he did. I just didn't see it. So how Rob gets into his car, I don't know, but he does. Earlier in that night, one of the cashiers asked Rob, the victim, to wear his coat because she was up near the front where the cashier was near the door and it was December and it was cold out. And she had film that she needed developed. And if you remember the old ways that we used to develop film, you put it in an envelope, you rip off the top of the envelope, and you have a receipt. She stuck that receipt inside her pocket, only it wasn't her pocket. It was Rob's coat that she was wearing. After they did a search warrant on John Wayne Gacy's home, they found that receipt in his trash. How did it get there if Rob was never there, right? That was a good example of the police work that I talked about in the beginning of this video. Now, how did they get into his house? How did he become a suspect? Well, the first thing that the police did was, okay, where was the last place Rob was seen? The pharmacy where he worked. Talked to the girl. Girl said, yeah, he said he was going outside to talk to this guy about a job. What guy? Guy that owns this PDC or PCD construction. John Wayne Gacy. They got a list of people, and this is standard textbook detective work. You get a list of everybody that was at that store. Number one, because yes, there might be a suspect in there, but they're witnesses. Hey, did you see Rob talking to anybody? You got to talk to them all. So they got a list of the people that were there. John Wayne Gacy's name was on this list. Another textbook thing that you're going to do, as if you're a decent detective, is run those names and see if there's any criminal history. Because guess what? If somebody pops up with a kidnapping or maybe a sodomy charge, that's somebody that you're going to want to look into, right? That's what happens. A good detective runs John Wayne Gacy's name. Oh, he was arrested in Waterloo, Iowa 10 years ago for sodomy? Ooh, might want to talk to him, right? That's what got the ball rolling. And little did they know that John Wayne Gacy, by the time they did this search warrant to look for Rob Peast, already had 27 bodies of boys underneath the crawl space of his house. And Rob was not there. So, police do a search warrant. They get there. They find the receipt. So they know Rob more than likely was there. They found a class ring. They find all these little trophies, which is something else that hasn't changed through the years. Serial killers take trophies. Most of the time it's because they want to masturbate to them. They want to relive what they did. And in some cases, it's just a fuck you to society and to those boys in this case. And I think there's a mixture of that for John Wayne Gacy. I am sure that he masturbated to, they had one boy's fishing license. Now to you, it may be like, really? Why would he? How do you get excited by looking at a fishing license? Some people, National Geographic used to do it for them. But you got to understand, the way you think isn't how a deviant sexual offender thinks. They are reliving that fishing license reminds them of what they did to that particular boy. Okay? So that's how it happens. But I think a small part of it is that F.U. John Wayne Gacy had an issue with society, even though he says he doesn't. He says when he came out of prison, he was like, you know what? I could have had a bad attitude, but I didn't. I just said, I'm going to show you, and I made something of myself, and I had a record. Good for you with that attitude, okay? I applaud that attitude. You kind of left out the part where you started murdering boys and shoving them under your crawl space, though. So, I think part of keeping those trophies was that little boy in him that was being abused by his father down in his basement. So, again, I am into psychology, and it interests me, but I stay in my lane because I'm not an expert at it. But I think that crawl space, I think psychologists will say that represented him as a little boy being in his own basement when he was a child and being beat up and abused and verbally abused by his father. By shoving those boys in that crawl space, that was a representation of what he went through. Yeah, maybe subconsciously, but sometimes people want to make things more complicated than what it was. And to me, I believe that it was the easiest way for him to get rid of a body. Number one, okay. Number two, it was all about control. He had it in his property, under his house. He controlled it. Now, Rob Peace, like I said, wasn't there. That's because he ran out of space. He had too many bodies under there. And he started dumping bodies in the river. And I think he dumped 4 bodies in the river, Rob being the last one. But again, we'll go back to the first search warrant. They find the driver's license of some kids, fishing license, a class ring. And they start realizing some of these people that have worked for John Wayne Gacy in this construction business have gone missing. I think there was like 2 or 4 of them. Now, I mean, I know a lot of missing persons, but I mean, personally, do you know of it, one missing person that you're related to or worked with you? Probably not. Here you have 4, with the only connection being John Wayne Gacy. So it didn't take a lot for detectives to start piecing stuff together and say, hey, we have a problem here. So they found these things during the search warrant, but they didn't find enough to arrest him for Rob Peace. Okay. It's not like they went in there and they found a body. They didn't find really anything, little trophies, but at the time they didn't really know what those trophies were. Hindsight's always 20/20. They find a class ring. Well, and it has the initials of a missing person on it, but they don't know that it's a missing person. They don't know that until later. And then they can piece it together and say, oh, that was Johnny's. Well, they didn't know it, but they just knew something wasn't right. And they knew the answers that he was giving them, like, hey, can you come down and we can talk about Rob? I don't know who Rob is, but I'll be down there when I get there, and things like that. They knew something wasn't right with him. So they started following him 24/7. And they got their cover blown right away. Gacy knew that he was being followed. So then they changed up the tactic to an overt operation where, hey, we'll let him know. Like if he goes into a restaurant and eat, we're going to go in too. We're just going to be around him. Is that harassment? I mean, it's a police tactic. I don't fault him for that. And it worked because John Wayne Gacy cracked. He couldn't take it anymore, these police following him. But in one of these incidents, John Wayne Gacy invited them into his house. The police that were following him. He would tell people at the restaurant, oh, they're my bodyguards or whatever it was. So he became friendly with them. The feeling wasn't mutual. Okay? They were doing their job. So they go into the house with Gacy. One of them goes to the bathroom and he's actually looking for a stolen TV that another missing person said that was missing. But when he's in the bathroom, the heater kicked on. And he said he got a horrible stench. And he knew it was a dead body. So when they left, they went back and applied for a second search warrant of the same house. And that's pretty difficult to do. But they were able to do it. And then that's when they got into the crawl space. And they found the first body. And then a second body. And subsequently a third. And a fourth. And a fifth. I believe up to 26, 27 bodies underneath this small crawl space. And then a couple that were outside in his garage where he poured concrete over a fire pit. So, and then he dumped 4. He confessed to a total of 33 murders. Again, things that we can learn from that is control. He had to control the situation, no matter the situation. I always look for that in offenders. When you're looking at like serial killers, and I use them because it seems like they're the ones that I study most. But not all, not even a quarter of all murders are done by serial offenders. But a lot of times the unsolved ones, remember, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. A lot of times police know who did something. You have a domestic, let just say O.J. Simpson, for example. You have domestics over and over and over again, and then the wife missing or disappears, or she ends up dead and nobody knows anything. There's no evidence. Police know. Again, it's probabilities. It's more probable than not that the offender is the abuser who's in that home, but they may not be able to prove it. My new book, Echoes of Evil, Unmasking the Minds of Infamous Killers. What would I do if I had the opportunity to go back and interview infamous killers, people who have killed? What if I was able to observe them without them knowing? People like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, or even earlier than that, Billy the Kid, right? Seth Bullock, people don't know. Wyatt Earp, these people have killed. So I want to talk to them. Hey, what's it like to murder? What is your pre and post offense behaviors? What did you do? What were you thinking? How does it affect you? Do you have remorse? Do you have regret? And I'm able to do that in this book. Okay. Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger, The Mafia with Al Capone, Roy DeMeo, Anthony Spilaccio, Dr. Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, Timothy McVeigh. Okay. The ideologies of some people and why they decide to kill. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Charles Manson, who may or may not have actually killed anybody. Richard Speck, who killed 8 nurses, all in one night. I took nonfiction, blended it in with fiction, and came up with Echoes of Evil. Order the book, 400 and some odd pages. You will not be disappointed if you like true crime and maybe a little bit of fiction weaved in. Thanks for watching. Ames out. So, serial murders make up a very few of unsolved murders, but I study them because they're the most intriguing and I can learn from them. And one of the things that I learned, and John Wayne Gacy exemplifies it, is control. And he had to control everything. Being a boss of this construction company, all the way to keeping those bodies in his control, in his house. I know that he did not like dumping those bodies into the river. Now, think about that for a second. Wouldn't you, let's say, it's hard to do, but pretend you're a murderer. You start murdering people. Would you want to put the body as far away from you as possible, either through remorse or through the more chances you have of being caught if that body is found with you? But if you put it into a river and it floats away and it's gone, it washes away all evidence, and but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to maintain that control and keep the boys, in that crawl space. Now we go back to Rob Peast. After he killed Rob, he put him up in his attic. First of all, think of how strong you have to be to do that. You have a 15-pound healthy male adult who is dead weight. You're thrown over your shoulder, carrying him up into the attic. And when police came to him to talk to him about, do you know Rob? Have you seen Rob? No, I have no idea, blah, blah. Rob was steps away from the police that were at his door asking him those questions. He was in the attic. Let me see what else was very interesting about John Wayne Gacy. Again, very arrogant. Very arrogant. So arrogant that allegedly his last words were "kiss my ass" before he was executed. Now, they interviewed one of the police officers, detectives that witnessed the execution. He said he didn't hear that. But allegedly, that's what he said. And I believe it, if you listen to him. Again, nothing was his fault. He said after he confessed to all these murders in detail, to more than one person. He first confessed to his attorneys, and then later confessed to the police. And then after he spent some time in jail, and towards the end, he says, "What murders? I didn't kill anybody." And then it was, "Well, I had accomplices." That, my friends, is a narcissistic liar. Okay, that's all that is. You can't believe them. People that change your story like that, I mean, it happens all the time, right? But I compare him to Ted Bundy, who towards the end of his life started telling more about his crimes. Now, he blamed it on porn, and there's some truth to that. But listen, all you're doing is you're projecting your violence off to something else. That may have invigorated you to commit these crimes, but listen, you were going to be a murderer without pornography in your life or not. Now, that gets into the nature versus nurture talk, whether you're born a violent sexual predator or it's learned. I haven't come to a conclusion yet. I see evidence for both, and sometimes I think it's a mixture of both. But John Wayne Gacy is one of the worst. At the time, 33 murders, I think, if I'm not mistaken, now that's not the most, I guess, but I believe that's the most somebody's ever been convicted of in the United States. Now, the serial offender that I'm currently investigating, his number's close to that. I'll tell you that. But he wasn't convicted of that. Gacy was convicted of 33 murders. Did he do more than that? His attorney, his death row attorney, believes so. But she also believes he had accomplices. I don't really believe that. The only part that I would entertain is, yes, that crawl space is small, and he had his two helpers digging down there. So, I could maybe buy into the theory that they disposed of these bodies, but I won't go there because I don't see any evidence of that. I guarantee that he committed these acts of sexual deviancy and murder by himself. He didn't have an accomplice to that. That is what I believe. And John Wayne Gacy is and you had neighbors there who said, I knew the good John Gacy. And part of me wants to say there is no good John Gacy. It's just a mask. What we wear and what he wore. He projected what he wanted other people to see. But I promise you, those 33 victims, they saw the other side of John Wayne Gacy, and that's a side nobody wants to see. So a serial killer can be anybody. You just don't know. But after he's outed, there's always red flags. And there's always, I should have seen, or he did this. I would have known. You'll never know. I felt bad for I feel bad for all the victims' families. But the one that they showed on there, the father beat himself up, saying he should have been a better father, he should have known, and this and that. And That's tough. I mean, I I can imagine. I can't say I can't imagine. I can. I've gone through something similar, but um, life, life is crazy how things happen, you know. And I just hope that we as society and as detectives can grow and learn from John Wayne Gacy. Then we get into the whole debate about death penalty, and for the most part, I don't like it, just for the fact that I don't like that the government has that type of control over human life, which is the most valuable and precious thing there is in the earth. But John Wayne Gacy took 33 and affected countless lives. So does he deserve to die? Yeah, probably. Okay. Should the government be able to do it? Well, I guess we are the citizens is an extension of that hand of the government that is injecting him to kill him, or you know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm not willing to go one way or the other on the death penalty. I just know that John Wayne Gacy would have murdered had he ever been let out of jail. Just it happens all the time. I think we're getting better, I hope, in the criminal justice system of not letting these type of offenders get out. It wasn't that way in the past. 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even up into the 90s. We would let these sexual deviants out and they would kill. And they should have just been kept locked up. Or some people say death. That's the thing, is it takes the death in order to get life or to be sentenced to death. You know what I mean? You could rape 4 or 5 people and then maybe you'll get sentenced to 80 years. They don't recognize, oh, it's a problem, and if we'll try to rehabilitate them and let them out, and then that's when it progresses to murder because they don't want to go back. They got to nip it in the bud before it gets to the point of murder. Sometimes I wish I was on a parole board. That's what I wish. I'll have to look into that. Until that time, I'll just continue to be a detective. That's all I know how to do, and that's what I love to do, and I love learning. And as much damaging it is to my soul half the time, researching about all these serial murderers and the effects that they have on families, it's what I do, and I do it to be the best. I think of somebody asked me the other day if I was, well, you're supposedly the best detective in the world. No, I'm not. I'm not even close. Okay, but I try to be. Sure, you want to be. You do everything to be the best. Maybe that's what the Marine Corps taught me. You do, cleaning out a sink after I do dishes. If there's a speck of corn in there or something, I'm not going to leave it there. You got to clean it out. If you're doing the job, do it the best that you can. And that's how I approach cold cases. Anyway, thanks for watching. John Wayne Gacy, really a despicable, not likable person. And that's funny too, is because although, like, let's say all serial killers are somewhat despicable, right? Some have different personalities. People like Ted Bundy quite a bit. They like John Wayne Gacy too. He would have big barbecues and have people over and things of that nature. But once you realized what this person did, what Ted Bundy did, decapitating heads, keeping heads at his house, going and revisiting, masturbating, having sex with these decaying corpses, you should hopefully think they're kind of a despicable person. That isn't something that you're like, oh, well, I'll still have coffee with him on Tuesday. No, you got to cut that off. So Ted Bundy, if he was my friend, after I saw that he did this, I don't think I'd be his friend anymore. And I'm a very, 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 very loyal person. I just don't know if I could brush that off. And John Wayne Gacy, his controlling narcissistic behavior, and it grinds on you. Just listening to him talk, I'm like, I don't like this guy. But I never met him. I don't know. I'm like that with a lot of people. Rosie O'Donnell, I never met her, but something about her bothers me. Whoopi Goldberg, the same way. But maybe if I met him, I'd be like, oh, hey, Rosie, you're the nicest person in the world. Whoopi, give me a hug. You're all right, because I don't know them. I don't think I'd be giving a hug to John Wayne Gacy no matter how well he treated me. Just my opinion on John Wayne Gacy. Despicable serial killer. But we can learn from him, just like we learned from them all. So, thanks for watching. Hey, hands out.